All right, welcome back for another deep dive into the latest happenings in the world of Android development.
It's great to be back.
This is our third time doing this, and as always, we've got a lot to get through today. We've pulled some of the most interesting stuff from the Android Developers blog and Pro Android Dev.
Yeah, there's quite a range of topics.
Yeah, for sure. There's news about how apps are adapting to different screens, some important stuff about app security,
Yeah, some best practices for keeping our users' data safe.
definitely, and some interesting new tools that'll help streamline our testing.
That should make everyone happy.
Right. Everyone loves testing.
Or at least loves having good tests.
Exactly. Okay, let's jump right in. First up, Jetpack Window Manager 1.4 just hit stable. Big news.
It is.
I know we talk a lot about Jetpack Compose, but this is for those of us still using activities.
Yeah, Compose is great. Really is the future for a lot of UIs.
For sure. But we know that lots of apps still use activities.
Yeah, new apps too, not just legacy stuff.
Right. And Window Manager 1.4 makes multi-window experiences for those apps so much better.
It really does. I'm most interested in the updates to the window size class API. It's been opened up quite a bit.
Like how so?
Well, the constructor's open now. You can actually define your own custom window size classes.
Really? You mean beyond just the standard, like compact, medium, and expanded?
Right. And now you can specify the exact min width each EP and min height EP. Basically, it means you have way more control. You can make size classes that are perfect for your app.
That makes sense with all the different screen sizes we have now. Phones, tablets, foldables.
Exactly. This update lets you go beyond the standard breakpoints and get super specific with how your layouts adapt.
And I saw that they've made it easier to check if you're at a specific breakpoint, too.
Oh, yeah. They added some convenience methods. So
Yeah.
much cleaner to work with now.
What about the window width size class and window height size class things?
Deprecated, actually. Yep. They want you to use the new methods instead. Is width at least breakpoint and is height at least breakpoint. Makes a lot of sense when you think about it. More flexible.
The blog post has an example for migrating to the new API.
Oh yeah, I saw that. They really emphasize ordering your when branches from largest size class down to the smallest.
Is there a specific reason for that?
It's all about future-proofing, really. I mean, what if Google adds new size classes later?
Oh, I see.
This way, your logic always checks against the biggest size class first, so you don't get any unexpected behavior down the line.
Smart. So you're always applying the right logic, even as things change.
Exactly. All right, you ready to move on to activity embedding? Some pretty cool stuff there.
Let's do it. What caught your eye?
Activity stack pinning. It solves a very specific problem, but it's very cool when you need it.
Okay, tell me more.
Basically, you can fix an activity stack to a part of the screen, and it stays visible no matter what else the user is doing in your app.
That's interesting.
Like a video player that stays pinned while the user browses other parts of the app, or like a persistent chat window.
I can see that being really useful.
The example code uses splitattributes.builder and splitpinrule.builder and stuff like that.
Yeah, so you define how you want to divide the screen space, and then tell the split controller to keep that top activity stuck in place.
Exactly. It's really powerful. And you've got control over things like the split ratio and the layout direction, like left to right or right to left.
So you can really fine-tune it to work perfectly for your app.
That's right. Okay, next up, we've got pane expansion. This one's all about user control.
Sometimes called interactive divider, right?
Yeah, exactly. It lets users resize the panes when you've got two activities side by side, like in split screen mode.
So they can adjust how much space each activity takes up.
Right. Just drag the divider to make one side bigger or smaller.
It's like how you can resize windows on a desktop.
Makes a lot of sense, right? Give users control over how they want to view their content. And the code to set it up is pretty straightforward, too. More splitattributes.builder.
And if you're using Windows SDK extensions version 6 or higher, you can even customize the divider itself.
Oh yeah, you can change its color, width, how far it can be dragged, little details that can make a difference to the user.
Right. And then there's that new dialog full screen dim feature.
Yeah, that's an interesting one. A subtle change, but it can really improve how users interact with dialogues.
That's about dimming the background, right?
Right. Now you can choose to dim the whole window or just the part where the dialogue is coming from.
It's like bringing the dialogue into focus and making it clear what the user should be interacting with.
Exactly. And they mentioned in the blog post that Temu used this and saw a 5% reduction in accidental touches outside the dialogue.
Wow, that's pretty impressive.
Shows how these small UI tweaks can make a real difference. Okay, moving on. Window Manager 1.4 also makes it easier to handle different postures on foldable devices.
So whether it's unfolded, half-folded, or in tabletop mode.
Yeah. There's an API now, Window Info Tracker Supported Postures. It tells you straight up if the device supports that tabletop mode.
That's cool.
Yeah, means your app can adjust its layout specifically for that posture, to take advantage of how the device is being used.
Smart. And on top of all that, there are even more API changes. Some APIs have been stabilized, and there are new ones for adding animations to splits and getting updated window metrics.
It's a pretty big update overall, lots of good stuff in there.
Definitely. So how do developers actually start using all these new window manager features?
The good news is it's super easy. You just bump up the version number in your Gradle file, android.x.window.window to 1.4.0.
And if you want to test it out, you need to update the Android X at window testing dependency too.
Yep, same version number. All right, ready to move on to something totally different.
Absolutely, hit me.
Gemini in Android Studio.
Heard about this? Sounds like a game changer.
Oh, it is. Now you can actually attach images to your Gemini prompts.
What? That's amazing.
It's a huge leap forward for how we work with AI in development. It's like before we were trying to describe a painting over the phone.
Yeah, trying to explain complex visuals with just words.
Right. But now you can just show Gemini the image. You can attach JPEGs or PNGs.
They did say that images with good color contrast work best.
Makes sense, right? The AI needs clear information.
Definitely. And this unlocks so many cool possibilities. UI prototyping, for one.
Oh, yeah. Imagine you have a mock-up of a screen. Now you can just give it to Gemini and say, hey, write the compose code for this.
That's right. They even had a sample prompt. For this image provided, write Android Jetpack compose code to make a screen that's as close to this image as possible. Make sure to include imports, use Material 3, and document the code.
And they were careful to say this is just a first draft, though.
Right. You'll probably need to refine it, but it's a huge head start.
Right. And for more complex UIs with interactions and stuff, you'll have to be more specific with your prompts.
But still, it's a game changer for UI prototyping. What about using it for diagrams?
Oh, that's one of the best use cases. Upload an architecture diagram or a data flow chart, and Gemini can explain it to you.
Or even write documentation for it. Saves so much time.
It's amazing how much time it saves. And then there's troubleshooting. Imagine you're stuck on a UI bug.
You could take a screenshot and ask Gemini for help.
That's exactly what I'm talking about. It could even suggest code fixes based on things like window size classes. They gave an example where it helped with a layout issue on tablets.
Pretty cool.
It really shows how AI can understand UI development at a deep level.
So how can people try this out?
You have to be on the latest Android Studio Canary build. That's where they roll out the newest features first. And importantly, they made it clear that Android Studio doesn't share your source code without your permission.
Good to know. Privacy is a huge concern with these tools. All right, let's move on to Android 16.
Big milestone, Beta 3.
Yeah, platform stability means the API is locked in. No more changes.
Right, and all the app-facing behaviors are final.
This is the time to start getting your apps ready for the full release.
Yeah, absolutely. So what are some of the highlights of this beta? They were focusing on security and accessibility, right?
Yeah. One cool thing is broadcast audio support on Pixel 9 devices.
Oh, yeah, for hearing aids that use LE audio.
This is going to make audio in public places so much better.
Definitely. It's built on that new LE audio standard, so it's the future of accessible audio.
And there's this new outline text feature for better legibility.
It replaces the old high contrast text, draws an outline around text to make it stand out more.
Really helpful for users with low vision. And there are even new APIs in the Accessibility Manager for apps to use.
Yeah, so apps can check if outline text is enabled and adjust their UI accordingly.
That's great for apps that do their own custom text rendering.
Right. You want to make sure those apps are still accessible.
Now, one big change they're talking about is local network protection.
Or LNP for short.
Yeah. It's an opt-in feature in Beta 3, but they're planning to roll it out more broadly later.
This one's interesting. Right now, any app with the internet permission can access devices on your local network.
But with LNP, they'll need a more specific permission.
Exactly. Gives users more control over their network security.
So how can developers test this out?
There's an ADB command you can use. Add shell amcompat. Enable restrict local network. Your package name. Put in your app's package name there.
So that enables the LNP restrictions, and then you test your app.
Right. Test anything that uses the local network, like discovering devices or streaming media. You might see some errors if your app doesn't have the right permission.
They're really encouraging everyone to test this out and give feedback.
It's a big change, and they want to make sure it goes smoothly.
The Android team's also urging developers to get their apps, libraries, and tools ready for Android 16 in general even if you aren't planning to target the new API level right away.
It's always good practice to test your apps on new Android versions. There are always behavior changes that can pop up.
Like with the job scheduler, for example.
Yeah, they're enforcing quotas more strictly. And that set important while foreground method, it's basically a no-op now.
And ordered broadcasts.
Yeah, there are some changes there too. They only work properly within the same process now.
Anything else?
Well, they mentioned that if you're using Reflection or JNI to access internal APIs, things might break.
Which you shouldn't be doing anyway, right?
Exactly. Those internal APIs can change at any time. It's always best to stick to the public SDK.
For sure.
Oh, and they're also adding stronger security against intent redirection attacks.
Always good to see security improvements.
Absolutely.
And let's see, there's the new 16 KB page size, the deprecation of the announce for accessibility method, and some changes to how Bluetooth bond loss is handled.
Lots of details to keep track of.
For sure. But the good news is they're really good about explaining all this in the release notes and blog posts.
Right. And for apps that are targeting Android 16 specifically, there are even more changes to be aware of. New user experience enhancements, core functionality updates, better support for large screens, and new health and fitness permissions.
It sounds like developers will have their hands full.
They will, but these are all good changes that will make Android apps even better.
And one more thing about the release schedule. They're doing things a little differently in 2025.
2 API releases instead of 1.
Right. A major release in Q2 that might include behavior changes, and a minor release in Q4 for new features and bug fixes.
It's a good change. Gives developers more predictability. And they said the target API level requirements for Google Play will still be yearly, tied to the major release in Q2.
Makes sense. So to get started with Android 16 Beta 3, developers should enroll their Pixel devices for OTA updates or use the 64-bit system images in the Android emulator.
Yeah. And it's always good to test on both physical devices and emulator.
For sure.
And make sure to report any issues you find.
That feedback's crucial.
It really helps them make Android better.
All right, before we wrap up, we wanted to touch on a security topic that's always relevant, man-in-the-middle attacks.
Or MITM attacks.
Yeah. We saw a really good article on Pro Android Dev about this.
These attacks are a serious threat. They're right up there with some of the biggest security risks listed in the OWASP Mobile Top 10.
Like insecure communication.
Right. And weak defenses against reverse engineering.
So what is an MITM attack exactly?
Basically, it's when an attacker gets in between your app and your server, and they can intercept and mess with the communication.
Without either side realizing what's going on.
Exactly. It's like someone listening in on your phone calls and changing the words you're saying.
And the article explained how these attacks happen.
It starts with intercepting network traffic. They might use ARP spoofing or set up a fake Wi-Fi access point.
Then they try to decrypt the communication if it's not secure.
And then they can do all sorts of nasty things. Steal data, hijack your session, inject phishing attempts, or even slip in some malware.
Sounds scary.
It is. But the good news is there are ways to prevent this.
Like always using HTTPS with TLS for all network traffic.
That's the most important thing. And make sure you're using a modern version of TLS, like 1.2 or 1.3.
And you need a valid SSL TLS certificate from a trusted certificate authority.
Right. And you can even use HSTS, which forces browsers to always use HTTPS for your domain.
So that prevents someone from downgrading the connection to an insecure protocol.
Exactly. The article shows how to do all of this in your Android app by configuring the network security config in your Android manifest.xml.
That's a good place to start. And then there's certificate pinning, right?
Yep. That's an extra layer of security that goes beyond just using HTTPS.
So how does it work?
You basically tell your app to only trust specific SSL/TLS certificates. You embed those certificates or their public keys right into your app.
So even if an attacker has a valid-looking certificate, if it doesn't match the ones you've pinned, the connection is rejected.
That's the idea. And the article has an example of how to do this using the OKHTTP networking library.
Very cool. Yeah, and then there are network security configurations. That's a feature that's been around since Android 7.0, right?
Right. It's a way to define all your network security settings in a separate XML file.
So you can block clear text traffic, enforce TLS, and do certificate pinning all in one place.
Exactly. It gives you a lot of control. And the article shows an example of what this configuration file looks like.
Very helpful. And on top of all that, they stress the importance of validating SSL TLS certificates properly.
Yeah, don't just accept any certificate that comes your way. Make sure it can be traced back to a trusted certificate authority.
And don't disable certificate validation, even during development.
Never a good idea. It can lead to serious security holes.
And the last piece of the puzzle, disabling insecure cipher suites and protocols.
Right. Make sure you're using modern, strong encryption algorithms.
They recommend using TLS 1.2 or 1.3 and disabling older protocols like SSL 3.0 and TLS 1.0.
And stick with strong cipher suites like AES GCM or CHACHA20 Poly 1305.
The article even shows how to configure OKHTTP to use these.
Yeah, it's all about making it harder for attackers to crack your encryption. So it's a multi-layered approach to security. HTTPS, certificate pinning, network security configurations, strong encryption. You really need all of these to protect against MITM attacks.
Sounds like good advice.
It is. And the best part is, most of this is relatively easy to implement.
Okay, one last thing before we go. We wanted to talk about some new tools for unit testing view models.
Ah, yes, the new view model scenario.
This is in the Android X Lifecycle library, right?
Yep,
Makes it so much easier to test view models.
it really does.
Before, you could create a view model using its constructor, but that didn't give you the full picture in terms of lifecycle and state management.
Right. It was hard to test things like the clearing of the view model store or how the view model handled saving and restoring its state.
And that's where this new view model scenario comes in.
Exactly. It gives you a much better way to simulate the entire life cycle of a view model, including state restoration.
And to use it, you need to add the AndroidX.Lifecycle.Lifecycle-View Model Testing dependency to your project, version 2.9.0-Alpha 8 or higher.
Right. And then you can create a view model scenario using a builder and provide all the dependencies your view model needs, like a coroutine scope and a save state handle.
And there's this recreate method, which is really cool. It lets you simulate what happens when your view model state is saved and restored, like when there's a configuration change or the process dies.
Yeah, it even handles parcelizing the data in the save state handle. So you can test that your view model is saving and restoring its state correctly.
And the use block in Kotlin makes sure that everything is cleaned up properly after your test is done.
Right. The view model store is cleared and the oncleared method of the view model is called.
And you can even call viewModelScenario.close manually if you need to.
It's very flexible, and it works with Kotlin multi-platform too.
This is really big improvement for unit testing view models.
It is.
So, as always, lots going on in the Android world. New features, new tools, new security best practices.
Definitely keeps us on our toes.
It does, but that's what makes it exciting.
Absolutely.
So to all you Android developers out there, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep building awesome apps.
We'll be back soon with another deep dive.
And until then, think about this. With all these advancements we've talked about, what do you think is the next big thing that will change how we develop for Android?
Something to ponder.
Until next time.